hopefully.
We are starting the Clean Water Commission January 25th, 2023 training for new commissioners, as well as a refresher for the veterans. And the chair Addis and Vice Chair Jones are not present, so Alice Millward, staff liaison, is going to take roll really quickly because we do have a quorum, and also handle the public comment. So, Augie?
I'm here.
Dunich?
Present.
Daisy?
Here.
Martin Bem?
Here.
Bergen?
Here.
And Trost.
Here.
And also present as staff, Brent Davis,
Here. Josh Neville.
Jeff Schnabel, and
Rob Swanson.
I just checked again, and I checked this afternoon, and I didn't see any public comment that came in, so nothing to address at this time. And there is no action items on the agenda, so this is just purely for training purposes. I'll turn it over to Mr. Swanson.
Already?
Already.
Well, do you have the presentation up behind me?
I will in just one moment.
Okay. I have like a little over a dozen slides here. And what I'm going to talk about is the 2019 NPDES Phase 1 permit.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Nobody introduced me. I'm Rod Swanson. I've been working on stormwater things at Clark County for a couple of decades now, and I more or less am the permit manager for the stormwater permit. So I do things like compile the annual report and update the stormwater management plan and work with interdepartmental agreements, that type of thing. And I also have been the person responsible for maintaining the Clark County Stormwater Manual. Okay. The first slide on the next page, the big list one. Yeah. So I don't know, I'm not a big fan of acronyms, but a lot of the things that we do are based on federal regulations promulgated by the EPA many years ago. And NPDES means National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It was created back in the 1970s as the process by which the existing polluters would be brought into compliance with water quality standards. But everybody just calls it the NPDES permit because it's the same all over the country. Another acronym that I would use is MS4, which is a Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, which is another EPA acronym. So instead of saying all those words, we just say MS4. It means the same thing in Maine as it does in Alaska. And another one that we do use is IDDE, which is Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination, which is the process of removing things that aren't stormwater from your stormwater system. I think that's as far as I'm going to go with the acronyms. So on that first slide, slide 2 actually, there's a list of permit conditions, and the permit, NPDES permits have like conditions that are in every permit, whether it's for a sewer treatment plant or a stormwater municipal system. And then there are things called special conditions, and those are the special conditions that are unique to the permit that Clark County is under. There are 6 permittees under the Phase 1 permit. These were municipalities that had over 100,000 people in the 1990 census. So it would be Seattle, Tacoma, Snohomish County, King County, Pierce County, and Clark County. Clark County just barely was over 100,000 in 1990 for an unincorporated area.
And that doesn't update
every 10 years with the new census?
No, the phase one is like, it's a temporal phase. It's not something, it's just like the first phase of doing it was the larger municipalities, and phase two was everybody over 10,000 or in a census designated urban area. And that was around 2000. So the phase twos will never be a phase one, for instance. Even if there have 500,000 people, there'll still be a phase two. But hopefully by then, they'll have the same permit for everybody. So there's two of these conditions I want to talk about here. One is S5, which is the Stormwater Management Program. That's basically the permit requirements for all the things that we do. And very briefly, I'll touch on S9, which is the annual reporting requirements. I think I'll just proceed from here to the next slide, rather than going through the list. The first requirement is that we have legal authority to control discharges to our MS4. That's something we had to put in place before we actually got the permit back in 1998. And there's a chapter in our code, 1326A, that basically prohibits the discharge of contaminants to our storm sewers and to waters of the county. Then a few years later, we added another requirement that people who own stormwater facilities in Clark County have to maintain them to the standards of the county stormwater manual. A really huge element of our program is mapping all of the assets that we own, their stormwater assets, and also we include assets that we don't own because we regulate them, and the whole system is interconnected, so it's really important to know what everything is. There are about 1,700 facilities that are owned by Clark County, stormwater treatment and soil control facilities, and about another 1,700 that we regulate in Clark County that we don't own, but their 1326A applies to them, and the permit applies to them if they are actually connected to our conveyance system.
What's an example of one that we don't own but we regulate?
Costco.
Okay.
Meyer.
Okay, so not a municipality, but like a corporation.
It could be a public school. It could be anything that's not part of Clark County government. So if it's a health department facility, that would be part of the county system. But anything that's not county owned is something we regulate.
So is this also, that would include subdevelopments?
And subdivisions are interesting. And in Clark County, the developer or applicant may, at his discretion, decide whether the facility goes onto a separate tract and is given to the county when the plat is recorded, or they may keep it as a private facility, and then the HOA takes ownership of it when the plat is recorded. We require the applicant to create an HOA. So when the plat is recorded, the applicant owns all the lots. He's the primary owner of the facility. So yeah, it's really just like, if it's not in Stormwater Clark, which is the name of the database, it doesn't exist in our world. So it's really important that everything gets in there. But Jeff, do you know how many miles of pipe we have now?
More than 500,
Okay.
probably approaching 6 right now.
Do you have any idea how many miles of ditches we have?
No.
That's okay.
More than a couple.
Yeah, and also having the stormwater system, conveyance system mapped really well really helps if we find a problem, like something is leaking into the system, or we find an outfall where there's some contaminants like high bacteria or something. That gives us the ability to trace it back upstream.
Do you include creeks and their tributaries in the stormwater process?
The simple answer is no. So when a drop of rainfall falls on a roof and goes down through the downspout and out onto the parking lot and into a catch basin, is both waters of the state and stormwater. Once it goes into our system, it's regulated stormwater. And as soon as it comes out of a pipe out of our system, it's no longer stormwater, it's just waters of the state. So any place where there's water running on the ground is waters of the state, not necessarily stormwater.
How are waters of the state regulated?
They're regulated by the Department of Ecology for water quality, and Fish and Wildlife for things that involve habitat. So if you do a project in a creek, like we put stream gauges in some of the creeks here off and on, and we had to get a letter approval for that project, hydrologic project approval. So we have internal coordination where we have little agreements between the departments that list responsibilities of the individual departments, like internal services that owns all of the buildings and campus. They basically are responsible for maintaining their stormwater facilities and using pollution control practices while they're doing their maintenance work. We have another agreement with Department of Community Development for Grant Works that they implement our development regulations. And that's the main two. On Public Works, of course, we contract with an intra-departmental agreement with Public Works Road Operations to maintain the stormwater facilities that the Clean Water Division owns. And we do have, the permit also looks at, the permittees coordinating with each other. So what we do is we have quarterly meetings with Southwest Washington permittees. There's 4 phase 2s in Clark County, Shugo, Camas, Vancouver, and Battleground. The other cities aren't permittees because of the size of the population when the phase 2 permit came out. And then there's some other permittees. There's Longview and Kelso and a little bit of Cowlitz County, Centralia, and every once in a while Aberdeen will join us remotely. There's a public involvement requirement, so there's 3 main pieces of that. One is the Clean Water Commission, which is a public process, and they report to the council, obviously. And then the county public process for things that the county council does, like approve our budget or approve ordinances that change our code, or approve Jeff's stormwater capital plan. And also the stormwater management plan, which is a document that we write to share with the public and internally about the things we do to meet the permit requirements. And we update that every year, submit it with our annual report. Here we go. Let's see, stormwater controls for development and redevelopment. So I talked about that a little bit already, but we have the county has a stormwater manual. It's about 1,400 pages long, and it's equivalent to the state ecology standards. The Department of Ecology has a thing called the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, which they write as a guidance document, but they reference it specifically in the permit that we have to have either use that manual or one that they deem to be equivalent. So Clark County's 2021 Stormwater Manual has been approved by Ecology as the equivalent to their manual, and any permittee in Western Washington could use our manual if they wanted to. But commonly, they have a manual that has some administrative things of their own, and then they reference the Ecology manual. That's a lot easier to do. So our manual applies to projects that are over 2,000 square feet of impervious area generally, and if it's over 5,000 square feet, additional sets of requirements come in, such as building water quality treatment facility and adding flow control to reduce the amount of water or the rate at which water goes into streams from the added impervious surfaces, roofs, parking lots, driveways, that type of thing.
Where does adding permeable surfaces come into that kind of a process?
Those are, well, the design uses a hydrologic model to size the treatment and flow control facilities. So permeable pavement, for instance, goes into the model basically as a landscaped area, like a yard, kind of simplistically. So lower levels of water can sink into it, but higher amounts of rainfall will start to run off of it, so that helps them decide how big to make the facility.
Is there any permeable pavement anywhere in the county?
That is some. We've found, Public Works has found that permeable asphalt is a really poor surface because the technology isn't robust enough in this area. It tends to get compressed and come apart. There's an example of one that was put in a number of years ago at the Accord Toyota out by SR 500 and 205. We did a project there actually, it was really interesting, but they have approximately 1.8 million tiles about this big. I think when they put it in, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, it cost them $2 million. And it was designed to absorb everything up to a 100-year rainfall event, which would be about 1.5 inches in an hour, or like 4.5 inches in 24 hours. And we monitored it, had it set up so that we could keep track of the water coming off the top of this thing, and it actually was able to do its design criteria. It's pretty impressive. They had the way it was built is there's like 1.5 feet of cobbles, then like a layer of coarse sand, and then they put the pavers on top of that. The pavers came off of pallets and sheets, so they just dropped them on. It's very cool.
Is that permeable surface optional for development?
Well, it depends. Like so many things. The permit requires us to use low-impact development for development projects, and there's different ways that can be approached, but basically the way it works is like for roads, you can use permeable pavement, or you can use a bioretention facility, which is an infiltration facility like a rain garden, if you've heard of those. Alternatively, you can use anything you want as long as it meets a modeling criteria of not exceeding a certain amount of flow, like forested flow from a very small amount to about half of what a 2-year storm would be. I don't know if that answers your question, but basically it's mandated, but you can get around it. Like you can put in, instead of doing permeable pavement, you could put in inlets and a filter vault and dry vaults, which just make the water disappear to the ground.
And does it have like a certain lifetime, or does it clog up over time and then lose its function?
Some do, and some don't. Like the Toyota site is working just fine after 10 years. But the Fred Meyer project in Vancouver is not working so well. And we see, one of the reasons we no longer allow asphalt in public roads is because it gets plugged up, it gets clogged, because driving on it with dump trucks or garbage trucks just kind of squashes it flat. And then it can clog with silty stuff. You can't really get it out once it's in there, you know. But it's not totally clogged, it's just, it drains very slowly. Well, then, of course, we have to regulate the actual construction process, where people have erosion control requirements placed upon them so that muddy water doesn't discharge from the site. And for larger projects, development projects, we call them, that is done by Public Works Construction Management, who also manages county contracts to build projects. And for individual building residences, the Building Safety Department regulates the erosion control. And then after post-construction BMPs, like the things we were just talking about, those are more or less, they're inspected and approved by Public Works Construction Management. If it's an individual building permit for a home, then the Building Safety Department takes care of that. There's another requirement for stormwater planning that they stuck in the permit in 2019. There's two of those requirements that are pretty easy to do. One is have an ongoing process to make sure there are no barriers to LID implementation. And so far we haven't found any. Basically what I do is I ask the people who do development review, engineers and planners, if they ever have anybody complain that they can't use an LID BMP, and they go, never. And ecology also likes the idea of, it's a good idea, but I'm not going to go into that now, of trying to integrate stormwater program elements into regional plans like the comprehensive plan or the regional transit council transportation plan, but it doesn't really work very well because the permit requirements for the future are all taken care of through development regulations. We don't have any processes to build pipes and things for the future like you would for transportation as an element of the comprehensive plan. So it's pretty much, there's not much to do there. But we also have a planning requirement to look at a small catchment about, we have one that's 1,400 acres. It's a little creek that goes into Mill Creek. It's a developing area, and we did some analysis there. We made a 6-year plan and a 20-year plan, which is pretty vague. But you know, the main idea, what we're trying to do is the treatment requirements are pretty solid. They've been in place for about 30 years now. But the flow control is an evolving thing. And if you can use LID BMPs, you can generally preserve the existing hydrology. But in the area that we studied, we did some modeling kind of at a fairly gross level, and we found that if we can't use LID in this area, it's definitely gonna increase the amount of time that there are erosive flows in the stream. So our short 6-year plan is mainly to look at that farther to see if we have some other, if it's really a problem.
Back up, what's LID?
Low impact development.
Okay.
That was another acronym, damn it. Oh, well, they're like next time. So then, number 7 is structural stormwater controls, and I'll let Mr. Schnabel talk about that. But it's a permit requirement that we've had, since 2007, I believe, and we have, Ecology has a system of points set up that you can be assigned points to projects based on some elaborate criteria that they have, and we have to have a certain number of points by a certain point in time, which we'll be able to do easily. But, you know, the bottom line for retrofitting for stormwater is that there's an enormous need that is essentially impossible to meet, to bring things to current standards, because they've been building drainage systems, you know, since 1900, and the current standards we have for flow control really came into being in about 2013. So without using infiltration BMPs, it takes the water off the pavement and runs it into the ground. There's no way that you can sustain anything approaching a natural system for hydrology. So what we really have to do is prioritize where we do things. Some of the streams, like urban streams, there are areas that are all built out in the late 20th century. There's no point in retrofitting them with flow control BMPs because you really can't change the hydrology. So we focus on doing treatment BMPs for high traffic areas like Highway 99 or Hazel Dell.
I was out in the Lacamas watershed yesterday, and we were taking a look at various streams that are out there, and they were all running fast. They were all literally full of sediment. They were all straight. Because a lot of them were ditches, some of the big ditch and China ditch and all the rest of these things. Is there work afoot to look at these systems throughout the county and do like Clark Cook Utilities has done to some of theirs, and reconfigure them so that they have more ecological flow?
Well, the ditches are actually waters of the state, even though they were created by people to drain wetlands. And the drainage districts in and of themselves are MS4s because they're not purely agricultural under federal law. So those ditches actually should have a Phase 1 MPDES permit from Ecology to the drainage district as a
You mean each of
secondary
those things has a drainage district?
Well, the system out in that area has a drainage district. It's a quasi-governmental agency
Yeah,
with its
elected officials, yeah.
with its own authority. They also have what do you want to call it? They have essentially preemption from a lot of environmental regulation because of laws that were established long before there was environmental regulation. And they have a mandate to maintain the function of the drainage system. That's the purpose of their existence. So, you know, until a drainage district is dissolved and those facilities become part of another permittee system, you know, there's really nothing that we could do about them.
And how many drainage districts are there in this county?
Active ones, there's 2 in Lacamas. Jeff maybe knows a little more about this than I do, but there's one in Lower Lacamas, and then there's the one that includes China Ditch system upstream a little bit.
One of them's 5 and one of them's 7, right? I can't remember which.
I can't either.
south.
Yeah, there was
Not very many active ones in the
there
county.
was one at Farger Lake, and there's one down along, Vancouver Lake somewhere. And then there's a bunch of little ones that are like totally disappeared, in the Vancouver area, where there's a little ditch here, a little ditch there, draining some wetlands. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
But what you did is brought up a whole different question.
Yeah, scrap them.
Because if the drainage system that goes into Lockamos Lake is controlled by these drainage districts, and any kind of environmental change that anybody wanted to make to it has to go through those people, does it not, instead of the county?
They own and operate it.
Interesting.
Yeah, one of them was, made inactive, gosh, back around the year 2000 by the county. I can't remember the whole story, but it was a big public process. All right, back to number 8 here.
Sorry about that.
It's an interesting topic. One of the things I was concerned about with drainage districts is somehow some liability could bounce back on the county for these entities that weren't properly operating their MS4s that are in Clark County's 20 districts, but apparently that's not a concern.
One last question. You got Camp Bonneville that's out there, and you've got the drainage district controlling that drainage.
There's
Is
no
there
drainage
a conflict?
district there. There's no drainage district in Camp Bonneville, that's all county land.
But it goes in.
So the drainage districts control the ditches, they don't control the natural stream corridors.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, one of the best ways to manage pollution in stormwater is to stop it from getting into the stormwater, to begin with. They call it source controls, source control best management practices, BMPs, another acronym. The way we do this at Clark County is we have an inventory of businesses that have a potential to pollute stormwater, and it's a fairly big inventory. It's about 1,200 businesses at this point, and about half of them actually connect to our storm sewer system, and about half of them don't. Either they go into dry wells, holes in the ground, or they discharge directly to a creek or something. So we have a guy who spends a good portion of his time going and visiting the higher risk businesses, and then working with them to make sure they're not doing things that create pollution in stormwater or in surface water or groundwater for that matter. And one thing that we've found over the years is that leaky dumpsters are a really big source of pollution because people leave them open, they put garbage in them, and then they rust out on the bottom, and the rain goes through the garbage, makes leachate, and then that drains into a catch basin somewhere. And so we updated our manual just kind of on that theme. We put in standards that all dumpster enclosures had to have a roof over them. Basically, it would be someplace where they could be piped into it, or be piped into a sanitary sewer, and not have drainage that could drain into a catch basin and a storm sewer system. Yeah, so Bob does about 160 visits a year. That's just inspections, then all the follow-up work he does. And it's mainly providing technical assistance for things that people do outdoors and looking for things like indoor drains, like floor drains that don't actually go into sanitary sewer but might be connected to our storm drainage system because they were built in like 1972 and nobody cared back then. But, also, he provides technical assistance under a separate contract with the Department of Ecology for people who generate small amounts of hazardous waste, like auto shops, that type of thing. It's a really good service to the community. On that same vein, there's a thing called Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination, which is the IDDE acronym I mentioned earlier. And that has several components. One is to do surveillance of the county storm sewer system, mostly pipes for that matter. The other is to, includes our source control visits, but the main idea is to remove connections that are not stormwater connections, for instance, the floor drain, or somebody connects the sanitary sewer drain to a storm drain instead of the other pipe next to it. Yeah, and we respond to a lot of complaints. That's a significant part of it, because a complaint, we have to respond to it, because we don't know what it is. So we go out and look at it, that's what Bob does. And then sometimes it's something the county can fix itself, like it's a code violation or something like that. Other times it might be something that we refer to another agency, like the Department of Ecology or the Health Department, which is also a county department. And of course, we have to report all spills and any discharge to our storm sewer that could cause, as a hazard to the environment. We also report those under our permit requirements. And then, we're getting toward the end here, operation and maintenance is a huge element of our program. As I mentioned, here in the handout, it says 1,600 county facilities. That's because I made this last year. That's pushing 1,700. But, yeah, so we inspect every county facility every year, and using our asset management system, which is getting updated as we speak. And so that includes, like I said, 1,600 county facilities, and there's another roughly 12,000 catch basins the county owns, those inlets in the roads where the water runs in off the road. So every year, somebody inspects all those, and if they fail to meet our standards, which is basically half full of sediment, then back on trucks, factor trucks go out and vacuum them up. It's like a big, diesel-powered shop vac that can drill a hole in the ground.
How can I get them out of my lake?
Pardon me?
How can I get them out of our lake?
Get what out of your lake?
Bloody road drains. They go directly into the lake.
If they go directly into the lake,
Locamus Lake.
I understand. That's inside the city of Camas.
But how do we get them out of the lake?
I don't know.
Do you have any that go into water bodies directly?
Well, every catch basin that goes into the county storm sewer system, MS4, that water has to go somewhere. Either it goes into a creek, that it can go through a stormwater facility, maybe it doesn't go through a stormwater facility. If the road was built 30 years ago, it could go to a hole in the ground, because there's also a lot of areas where the geologic media is permeable enough that you can put pipes in the ground and make it infiltrate. That's really been it's the first preferred way to manage stormwater, because all you do is put a hole in the ground on the site and the water disappears. You don't have to build pipes all over the place. But in Lacamas, it's very expensive.
23 direct inputs into the water. 23.
Sounds like a retrofit program. But, I mean, that's essentially what our retrofitting does in our structural stormwater control program. We're going into areas where existing stormwater controls or treatment are either not doing what you want, or they predate some of the regulations that we have now. We go in, we try to get a little bit more treatment capacity out of them, let's put some flow control in. That's some of these projects that we do. So those are kind of things that you'd be looking at. If the city or someone wanted to do that.
Somebody in Camas knows about this retrofit process.
Oh, sure.
The city of Camas, just going to the strictly legal requirements right now, their phase 2 permit for Western Washington currently does not require them to do structural stormwater controls. And Ecology is looking at that. I was on an advisory committee about what they want to do in the next permit, and one of the things they were talking about was what level of effort to have for the phase 2 permittees like Camas. And it's really challenging, because some of them are tiny little towns, with maybe 10,000 people, and some of them are Bellevue, with 140,000 people and piles of money. It has a stormwater program since the 1970s, so trying to figure out what's an appropriate level of effort for these individual municipalities is a serious concern for people. But they will have one in the next permit.
How does the county interface with that process? Or do they?
The Department of Ecology writes the permits, and
The county tries to stay out of the politics.
No, it's not politics. It's basically environmental regulation, and so the Department of Ecology has to do something that they think meets all known, available, and reasonable treatment, which is called ACART. It's another acronym that I wasn't planning on using. But that's the standard the state holds for everybody. So This is another interesting thing, another sidebar, once I mentioned ACART. In the federal regulations that EPA promulgated, they require permittees to reduce stormwater pollution to the maximum extent practicable, which nobody knows what that means. But in Washington, there's no maximum extent practicable standard for municipal stormwater permittees, unlike the federal standards. So we're held to the same standard theoretically as a sewer treatment plant or a factory would be held to. So it's very challenging to write a permit that meets state standards. So there's one of the requirements, one of the special conditions is S4, which has a thing in it that says if you become aware that one of your outfalls is causing or contributing to a water quality violation, under some circumstances, you have to notify ecology. So you never sample above and below an outfall when it's raining, because it'll always violate turbidity.
Rod, one other question. The hole in ground you talked about,
Yeah.
I'm remembering something called a dry well. Is that a dry well?
That's a common name for them. Ecology.
Okay, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's a dry, like a couple, perforated concrete rings with the top on it. Usually they put a drainage trench out from the side of them, so if the dry well fills up to a certain level, it goes out into the drainage trench. And those are regulated under the State Drinking Water Act. Underground injection control is what that term is at the federal level. And so there's all sorts of different levels, everything from, injecting chemicals in to dissolve uranium out of the ground to, oil industry. And then there's the class 5 ones, the lowest level concern are what the stormwater wells are. And the Department of Ecology Stormwater Manual actually has a chapter about how to comply with state law. If you have a UIC well is what they call them. But the county's stormwater permit does not cover the class 5 injection wells because they're under a separate federal requirement. They're not under the Clean Water Act, like I said, they're under the State Drinking Water Act. So all of our dry wells and perf pipes that the county owns are essentially authorized under state law if we apply our stormwater management program to the areas that drain to those wells. So it's a totally separate regulatory system under two different processes. One is the surface water discharges have an actual Clean Water Act permit, and the underground discharges are rule authorized under a chapter of 173-218 Washington Administrative Code.
So is the rationale for that based on the fact that rechargeable groundwater is a source of drinking water, and that's the
Exactly.
basic idea?
Yeah, the whole underground injection control thing isn't about stormwater, it's about all the nasty stuff people stick in the ground. Like a septic system would be a class 5 injection well, technically under the law. So if they have a permit from the health department, they're legal. Okay, education and outreach, I don't have anything to do with that. So, I apologize. It's mainly what we try to do is raise awareness about stormwater pollution, get people to change how they behave, through outreach and education, and provide stewardship opportunities, which was hard to do during COVID. But we do have a program with WSU that's called the Small Acreage Program that teaches new acreage owners. It's kind of like a master gardener type of thing that we contract with them to do. And then there was one thing.
This is effective.
Probably for the people that take the class.
Okay. Okay.
It doesn't really relate to stormwater that much because most of these people, they're on like 5 acres out in the country, and our stormwater system doesn't connect to their property in all likelihood unless it's a ditch going in front of their house. Then there was one to evaluate program effectiveness. That was an interesting project because it's really hard to evaluate anything in a stormwater program to take one thing out and separate it from all the other things that are going on. It's just about impossible. But they did a project where they looked at a couple trails, one with Camas, and one of the trails we looked at was the trail down Cougar Creek from 119th Street. So they set up a kiosk out there with a bunch of information and placed the little poop bags out. And before they started the program, I should say, they went several times and they counted the number of dog turds on the trail. And then they did this outreach thing with tabling, where they actually stood there at the head of the trail and told people about stuff. And, I think what they found in general terms is like, not the most scientific study, but they started counting, after they did the treatment, which would be the tabling and meeting with people out there, is that in the urban area, people tended to be more responsive and pick up after their dogs. But in rural parks like Daybreak, they didn't really have much of an effect. I think people are more sensitive to having, dog excrement in sidewalks and streets in the urban area than they are in a rural area. That's just my impression. Oh, finally, S9. We have to do an annual report to ecology every year. And that's my thing I do. I'm working on it right now. So basically, I send an email out to anybody that has anything to do with the permit with a list of questions I have to have them answer. They send it back to me, and I enter them all in a big database at Ecology. And basically, there was like maybe 100 questions. A lot of them are yes or no questions. Did you do this thing? Did you do that thing? Or how many of these did you do? That type of thing. But I also attach documents to it that they require, like the little 6 and 20-year plan I mentioned for the Mill Creek tributary will have to be attached to that report. We do them every March. They have to be certified by the county manager, which is the chief executive official that we're responsible to, that they're true as far as she understands it. So it's a pretty serious thing. People have gone to jail for relying on these kinds of reports. Not necessarily a municipal one, but it does happen sometimes. And then we put it on our webpage. They probably go back to like 2012 on the webpage because we had a lawsuit that required us to do a bunch of stuff. And the annual reports were really good documentation that we had done it, so anybody could see it. Any questions?
I had a question for you, something you said earlier, about the relationship between stormwater management group and transportation. County's in the process of updating their comp plan, and so I assume the transportation element will be a major part of that update.
Yeah, the comp plan is like specific requirements in state law to address, transportation planning in the comprehensive plan, and it kind of has this kind of squishy language about things like stormwater drainage. So a lot of that language was written, back in the late 80s. And so the type of stormwater management we do now is just like not even considered back then.
But I was going to ask you, I mean, if you're improving roads, if you're widening them, if you're building new roads to serve, say, new subdivisions or whatever, isn't stormwater construction an integral part of that?
It is. It's absolutely. That's where the stormwater manual comes in. And the ecology manual that we have equivalent to it has the requirements, for using LID to the extent practicable, and building treatment facilities that treat the water to a certain level. There's different levels of treatment depending on the type of project it is. It might be different for an industrial site than it is for a residential subdivision. What's kind of interesting to me is the way we do the treatment EMPs is basically the same now as it was in the early 90s. It hasn't really evolved very much, just more gadgets out there. And then that also includes the flow control requirements, like the detention ponds, where you collect all the water and then meter it out slowly so it doesn't all rush down the stream at once. So yeah, any county project is subject basically to the permit requirements, and any private project is subject to our standards, which are in the permit. But the practice Clark County has used ever since we did the water quality ordinance back in 1998 is not to separate what goes to the county system from everything else. So we apply the same standards to somebody building a McMansion out in the boondocks as we would to somebody building a subdivision, in unincorporated Clark County. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You get to talk less now.
Yep. You can do it inside each of those things.
Oh, we're gonna do Rod again.
I'm not doing it again.
Hey, Rod, that was a good job. It's all right, it's all right.
Come on.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. Many of those
All
open.
right. So I'm Brent Davis. I'm the interim Clean Water Division Manager. I'm also a program manager in community development. That's my normal job. Primarily focused on our wetland and habitat ordinances and implementation of those regulations. So I've been helping Clean Water for about 6 months now. So I'm going to cover just some organizational stuff, and there's a lot of stuff here that I really am still learning, so bear with me, and we may need to dip into the experts behind me if some questions come up. So go ahead and the next slide. So this slide's pretty much an overview of you know, a lot of the stuff that Rod covered. Just, you know, where the regulations that we're under come from in terms of EPA and ecology. And then in terms of the permit compliance and the issues that Rod talked about, you know, the Clean Water Division is a leader for the county in that process, but we are supported by a lot of other parts of the county, a big part of Public Works and other programs and other departments. And we'll touch on that a little bit. So, you know, the other thing I think we need to emphasize is that compliance with this permit is important, and I would say it's actually critical, because there are consequences for not complying with the permit or being found to not be in compliance. In addition to the, you know, the public health and water body health, quality of life issues, there's serious financial concerns for the county. Namely, we can be fined by ecology. We can be subject to third-party lawsuits. The last time that happened, it cost us about $3 million plus our legal fees. And then in addition to that, it could affect eligibility for grants, not only related to clean water work, but to other programs that rely on state and federal funding. So, you know, there's a lot of risk in terms of being out of compliance. I'll touch on the range of things that we do in order to comply with the permit, that go into a little bit more detail than what Rod outlined. And then he also touched on some of our neighboring permittees, the City of Vancouver and Camas being Phase 2 permittees. But we also have some secondary permittees in the county, which a good example is WSU Vancouver. They are actually operating under the WSU NPDES permit as a sort of a satellite. It's called a secondary permittee, but they have their own program that's separate from WSU up north, and it's implemented, you know, within their campus, but it's subject to the permit that WSU holds instead of our permit. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this is another summary of the permit conditions, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Rod pretty much touched on most of it. I think the important point is that most of these special conditions in the permit have a lot of components to them. Next slide, please. So before I go and talk about the range of work that we do, I just want to talk a little bit about how we pay for it. So we have a clean water fee that we charge property owners in the county every year. There's you know, a formula for that based on where they're located, what type of use is on the property. And that is estimated this year to get us about $7.8 million in revenue. But our budget for 2023 is actually $9.3 million. We do get some additional revenue through grants, and we also, for the last few years, have been coming in under budget. So we're pretty close to being balanced with our revenues. But just this slide shows the distribution of where the money goes. So that $9.3 million, 19% of it is spent on capital projects. The big chunk is our maintenance and operations. That's 38%. And the important thing to note is that that's a piece that is going to grow year to year as we get new facilities online. The old facilities never get retired or go away, so that's an ongoing growing component. We spend about 5% on education and outreach, 9% on inventory and monitoring, 15% on permit compliance, planning, and policy, and then 14% on administration and customer service. So we could have years where this spending goes up and down a little bit, depending on what happens with the cost of planned capital projects or unexpected emergencies, major failures that have to be addressed immediately. So those are things that can come up as well. Next slide, please.
Do the clean water fees adjust annually for inflation or by council?
No, they are, the clean water fees fixed. We have updated the fee once since it was implemented in 1999, 2000. Yes. And we updated it in 2015. So that is something that, as in an interim role, I'm not sure how far I'll get on it, but it's something I want to pass on to a permanent manager, is getting the process started to start communicating with policymakers on why we need to do something with that fee so that it does grow as costs increase, and that we are looking at it more than once every 15 years. So, but there's a lot of work that has to be done to tell that story in a way that will resonate with the decision makers, because essentially we're going to be asking them to increase costs for all the citizens of the county. And that fee is pushed out with people's property taxes. So in the public's mind, it's just part of their property tax bill. Okay, so this is an organization chart. Apologize for the smallness of it, but of all the components. But the elements that you see that are surrounded by dashed lines, those are elements that are not part of the Clean Water Division. They're service providers that we rely on and we pay out of our budget to do work for us. But in terms of the division itself, under my position, we have our administrative support, which is Alice and Jennifer Lopez, and then we have two program areas with program managers, which are Rod and Jeff. Rod is NPDES permit compliance, Jeff is infrastructure and monitoring. And then in addition to that, you can see that orange box out to the side. That is a code enforcement officer that until this year was part of our division, but has been moved to community development with the rest of the code enforcement function there. And we still pay for that position as well as a half-time administrative assistant to support that work. We're still working out the details with code enforcement of how that's all going to work. But Scott, as a code enforcement officer, is focused on NPDES permit compliance related issues. So he looks at grading and erosion control. He also looks at our critical areas violations for wetlands and habitat, which generally are tied to these, as well as clearing vegetation, and also things related to forest activities that aren't covered under state permits. So So we fund that work. The rest of code enforcement is funded under general fund. So it's, you know, it's nice to have some dedicated resource to make sure we're getting the enforcement actions that we need. Under Rod's program are inspectors that look at those private facilities he was talking about, make sure that they're being maintained as they're supposed to, and then works with the owners of those facilities to get them into compliance if they're not working properly. And then on the source control side, the inspector he referenced that goes out and looks at businesses for those issues. On the infrastructure and monitoring side, there's an engineer and then 2 engineering technicians do a lot of work related to assessing. The engineering component is looking at facilities that our inspection process has found maybe not working, and trying to, you know, at a first cut, figure out if it's something that can be fixed easily or might need some kind of capital project. Works on prioritization efforts. The engineering technicians do all of the mapping and inventory work, as well as Julie also provides some assistance because she has expertise in planting design, so she provides a lot of work for our reforestation program. And then on the monitoring side, we have 4 natural resource specialists who install, operate, and monitor the monitoring stations for the various parameters that we monitor, as well as gather the data, prepare the reports that data supports. They are also currently helping us with grant management as well. So there's a lot going on here. In terms of the Public Works Department support, so we pay for a position in the Business Services Finance Group. We pay for a position in the Public Information and Outreach Group, and then we get other assistance with budget and that sort of thing, which is part of our overhead from the department. In terms of the operations support, there's a lot of connections there. The big one is our roads maintenance folks who we pay about $2.8 million a year to do all those inspections and maintain all those facilities. We also provide some funding to our, they're actually now called Noxious Weed Management, basically our weed management group to maintain our facilities in terms of noxious weeds and invasive vegetation. And then we also rely on the engineering and design section and project management section to deliver a lot of our most of our capital projects from cradle to grave. That includes environmental permitting. And then another important component for us is our fleet services, because all of our monitoring folks and our inspection folks have vehicles. So that's another important component. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not gonna go, I think that the important point here is this slide is essentially primary objectives and work products for each of those components for permit compliance. And it's just to point out that we cover a wide range of things and have a lot going on and a lot that we're responsible for. Rod touched on some of the work products in his group. Jeff is going to touch on the work products that in his group. In terms of outreach and education, I think Eric's going to be here at next week's meeting to talk about what he does. And then in terms of the facilities inspection and maintenance, so they perform inspections on all 1,700 of those county facilities. you know, whether, and then they look at all those catch basins that Rod mentioned. In addition to that, we are starting to implement a pipe inspection program. Hopefully this year, the equipment has been ordered, but it hasn't arrived yet. We're sharing that equipment with the road maintenance folks. We are gonna start using that equipment to do pipe inspections, which is gonna open up a whole new can of worms for us, I'm sure. But that's gonna be added to this list.
Are those devices that actually travel down the pipe?
Yeah, it's a pipe crawler.
It's a pipe crawler, robotic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Don't get it stuck.
but don't get it stuck, and, you know, we're still waiting to see what we're gonna find, because we don't know what condition our pipes are in.
Are we talking about going back to lead pipes? Are they that old?
Well, stormwater pipes are generally gonna be, the old ones are generally gonna be concrete, or maybe really old, you might find some terracotta, or I doubt we have it.
But not a metal pipe?
Not, maybe corrugated metal, but not, which I guess could potentially have some lead in them if they're old galvanizing techniques. That's a possibility. And then a lot of the newer pipes are gonna be plastic. So, let's see. I think that's probably enough on this slide. All right, next slide. So this is basically how we relate to, or how we rely on other programs in the county for the different components of the work that we do. And I think just the important thing to point out here is we have a lot of connections with our parks program and our noxious weed management program, obviously our maintenance and operations program. We rely heavily on our GIS services for our inventory mapping, as well as our asset management. You know, we rely on the development engineering review group and community development and the development inspectors that support them in public works construction section. We have some connections with the health department, and let's see, what am I missing here? The environmental permitting group in public works design and engineering. Let's see, and then because of our fee, we also interface with the county treasurer, because they are the entity that collects that fee and decides when certain waivers apply, and they also are involved with us if there's a dispute process in many cases. We're also pretty reliant on our prosecuting attorney's office, so the civil division, both for operational considerations and contracts and that kind of stuff, as well as on the liability side. And we work with multiple staff in that office depending on what the topic is. Now we have a direct connection with the code enforcement folks in community development. We rely on the building safety group and the permit center for their work on reviewing residential stormwater plans and making sure they get implemented during construction. Now there's also a connection with the wetland habitat group that I manage, because we advise development engineering on minimum requirement 8 of the stormwater manual, which is the wetland protection guidelines. So, you know, just a lot of relationships that make all this work. So, and I think, is that the last, okay, last slide is just some resources for some additional information. So there's the 2021 Stormwater Manual. There's as Rod said, it's 1,400 pages, a lot of engineering stuff. But there is a really great section on best management practices, the ones that are allowed to be used in the manual. And there's like detailed, you know, a few page descriptions of each one with some drawings of what they look like and some engineering considerations that that are pretty explanatory on what each of those BMPs are. So there's a link there for the permit itself. The Stormwater Partners of Southwest Washington has their own webpage. A section of that is Explore Your Watershed, oriented towards the public, part of our outreach. And then we have our Clean Water website as part of the county's webpage under Public Works. So any questions? All right. I think we're getting behind here pretty quickly.
Not your fault.
I tried to be quick.
Yeah. You did well.
Gonna give Jeff 2 seconds.
Right, I will go as fast as I can.
Okay.
Which one do you want to do first?
Infrastructure, I got it up. Okay, I gotta share first, then do it.
I wasn't organized enough to bring a computer or a printed thing, so I'm gonna stand and use that
You wanna look
as
at
my
mine?
prompt, so, no, that's okay, I'll just do that, but I will, I'll go over here and say hello to Sandra and Kate, see you guys. Because you won't be able to see me the rest of the time. I'll hold for just a couple seconds. To start.
Wait another minute or so.
Stand up,
Right.
stretch,
We probably should have just taken a break.
yeah.
That was a worthwhile walk. All right, well, hey, everybody, I'm Jeff Schnabel. I am the Stormwater Infrastructure Manager for the county. And you kind of saw where my groups fit into the overall structure. I have been with the county for coming up on 4 months. And parts of that program that you all have been talking about that I deal with are the infrastructure group. And so we are responsible for the mapping of our stormwater infrastructure into the database, managing that. We do the capital planning work that was mentioned, our 6-year capital plan that's adopted by council, that comes through our shop. And then all of that maintenance and inspection work that's done by the road ops folks and our construction engineering group. We manage those and coordinate those contracts and those service agreements on that infrastructure side. On the monitoring side, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and I want to do the same introduction, the monitoring group is the ones that do kind of the additional monitoring that's outside of that S5 stormwater management plan that Rod had mentioned. There's an S8 component to the special provisions in the permit that covers monitoring work, and so a lot of the work that my natural resource scientist group does is covered under that wing of the program. So, but this first little presentation is the capital plan and infrastructure program. So we can go next. I think I can skip most of this. This has been kind of covered, other than just to point out. Sorry, Alice, I faked you out. I'll point out really quickly that under those regulatory requirements, so the permit has that structural stormwater controls
requirement there, preventing or reducing the impacts to waters of the state, right, from existing stormwater infrastructure. So, and then the other thing that Rod mentioned briefly was that underground injection control, the UIC regulations. We do have some requirements that we have to address through our program for any of those dry wells that we own that are assessed to potentially have a threat to groundwater. So if they happen to be completed too deep and they are sitting with wet feet, so the bottom of the well is in the groundwater table, not so good, right? You're supposed to have that separation so that the water comes into the well, it gets filtered through the ground and cleaned before it gets into the groundwater. So there are some of those that we have that haven't met that standard, and so we have to go back and retrofit those. So that's part of this, part of that regulatory requirements that we operate under. Okay, sorry, thanks. So overall, we do the 6-year capital plan. We go to the council annually to have that adopted. We were there in November. We will go again next November. We typically go through about a 4-step process. We set our priorities each year, just tweak them a little bit if we want to be shifting directions or if there are new needs from ecology or others. And then we've got a database essentially of potential projects that are already known and already sort of evaluated, at least at a general level, to see if if they're viable projects. We go in and we look at those. We do a little more verification to make sure that when we do bring a project forward onto the capital plan, it's likely going to be something that is doable, right? We don't like to, sometimes you find things out as you're designing a project and say, "Whoa, geez, we can't do this. The water's not going to go there," or what have you, or there's too much infrastructure already under the ground. There's utility conflicts that make it so we can't do the project. Those kinds of things happen as you get into the design, but we like to try to take care of some of that up front before we get going. And then it's programming for construction, right? Getting that all set into a schedule and a timeline and a budget that we can deal with that meets those permit requirements and scores those points that Rod mentioned very first off, right? We got to make sure that the projects that we build are sufficient to meet those requirements that ecology has, right? Next, please. Number of project types that we deal with. Capital repairs. So anytime that we have those repair projects that exceed $25,000 for a single facility, that kind of kicks things into a different category from our ongoing routine maintenance that we pay for into a capital repair. And so those projects get put into the capital plan and funded and dealt with through the capital mechanism. Because they're more expensive, they take some design, some engineering design to usually get them going. So we treat them as part of our capital program. We do a lot of retrofitting and new facility construction, water quality improvements, and flow control improvements. So this, again, structural stormwater controls is aimed at areas that are already developed, right? We're not out there doing new stormwater infrastructure that supports new development, right? That's built by developers typically, right? When they're building their new stuff, they put the stuff in, and then there's that choice whether they keep it private or they give it to us, right? So we are going back to stuff that was built years ago, areas that don't have any treatment, don't have any flow control, and retrofitting those in, adding new facilities to try to get that treatment, kind of like what we're talking about with Roger on the side of the lake, right? Okay. Underground injection control compliance, that's going in and retrofitting or decommissioning those ones that are out of compliance. Stream stabilization, habitat improvement. We don't do a ton of those. We don't get credit so much under our permit for those, but when we can get grants, we can do some of those types of projects right in the stream and get a pretty good bang for the buck, but ecology doesn't give us credit necessarily or points for those towards our requirements. So we're kind of limited on those usually. Reforestation, Brent mentioned this. We've got a goal, a 6-year goal of reforesting 30 acres, kind of a rolling 6-year goal. 30 acres every 6 years of county property with native species, riparian species that we can increase shading in the streams, those kinds of things. One of my staff, specifically Julie Christian, runs that program for us, does a great job. We can also buy property. We can acquire property for stormwater benefit, right, by setting it aside. So we will typically work with the Legacy Lands program, which is under our Parks division, and we will cost share some of that kind of stuff. So when Parks is going to go buy a a piece of property and kind of set it aside. If there's some stormwater benefit to doing that, we will contribute money. So in this most recent iteration, in 2022, we contributed, $600,000, I think, of our capital money to help buy the, what's it called? The old Cedars Golf Course, the new Gordy Jolma, right? The Gordy Jolma Natural Area. So Legacy Lands was purchasing that. We were able to leverage some of our money in there, save them a little money, get credit and points under our permit for that as a capital acquisition.
Just
Make sense?
talk about the PEP points. What are the points all about?
They are an arbitrary, made-up system to try to put everybody who's on a permit on like an equal playing field so that ecology would have a performance measure to make sure that everybody's doing enough capital stuff. It's a pretty flawed system. They acknowledge that themselves. Just kind of it's a shot at trying to make sure that there's a way to measure productiveness of the capital programs that all the permittees have. Right now, the way it's structured, we actually don't necessarily rely on our retrofit projects so much to score those points, and we can have a longer conversation about this. I don't want to derail too much, but essentially there are certain elements of what we do, like street sweeping and property purchase, where we can get most of our points just by doing that. And the way it's structured right now, you get a lot more points for some of those types of activities than for, say, putting in a new bioretention facility or something like that, or retrofitting. So it's not real, workable. It's okay, but it's not something that really is helpful to us at the moment, I guess I would say, as far as planning.
To get a lot of
right?
points means money?
Points equals money. Yeah, different types of projects. One of the challenges with their system is that there are certain types of projects that might be really good projects for people to do, and they're very effective, but in the point system, they don't score very many points. And then there's other things that are just kind of, that aren't that great, but they score a ton of points. And so you're kind of put in that box where you got to score the points, but it's not the project you really want to do. So one of our goals and one of our objectives for our capital planning and our whole capital program is to have enough of different kinds of projects that no matter what they do at the ecology level, as far as that point system and how they're going to measure what we do, that we've always got enough good projects that we like locally that we can do to meet that permit requirement, no matter what they say that they want, right? So that's one of my big things right now is just making sure we have that breadth and scope of projects that we can draw from, no matter where they go with the permit, right?
So Jeff, given the emphasis on salmon recovery, is habitat improvement generate a lot of points given the dollars that are out there now for that sort of work?
Not a whole lot. Rod probably has a better idea of that part of the point scoring, but I don't think so. It's a percentage of the acres, essentially, that you are restoring, and you get a point for each of those. But I think in general, I would say no. It's not commensurate with the level of importance of the fish recovery, simply because the stormwater permit isn't necessarily focused on fish recovery, right? It's more on the water quality stuff and the stormwater aspect as opposed to habitat. So, but for grants, if you could show that kind of stuff, yeah, the granting agencies love that, right? You get a lot of points on a grant application for showing those types of benefits.
Well, there's certainly
That's where we try to get that money.
between water quality and stormwater runoff,
Yep.
which affects habitat.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, certainly a connection. Yeah. Yep. Couple ongoing programs, we'll keep zipping here. Reforestation planning, figuring out where we're going to go do those next planting projects. Sub-basin retrofit studies, it's an area where we'll kind of go in and take a very hard look at a high priority, really urbanized area and see what we can do there. What kind of retrofits would make sense there. And then street sweeping, like I said, we spend some money every year supporting the street sweeping program that the operations folks do. Let's go next. I'm taking too much time. Okay, so for our current 6-year plan, 2023 to 2028, adopted in November, there are 30 projects, plus those ongoing programs that I just mentioned, about $13.5 million programmed for that, for those 30 projects. You may not be able to see this, but the biggest chunk is the water quality component, so projects that are specifically looking at water quality benefit. That goes back to what Rod was saying earlier, where some of these most urbanized areas like Cougar Creek, Tenny Creek, some of these lower Salmon Creek tributaries that were developed long, long ago. They have very little treatment and very little flow control infrastructure in some of those areas. But it's been so long that the stream has been adjusting to not having any flow control that the stream's already kind of adjusted. It's blown out wide and deep, right? So we can't really put that back. So we don't typically focus so much on the flow control retrofitting in those areas, but we can have a lot of benefit by making that water cleaner by the time it gets down to, say, Salmon Creek, because again, there's our salmon-bearing stream, right? So if we focus on the treatment retrofits, we can do more good downstream, right? And then we also do have some hydrology where we're talking flow control, a little bit of money for some of those UIC retrofits, reforestation, some repairs, and they all add up to 13.4. Let's keep going. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but it just basically shows a layout of kind of the 6-year, a condensed version of our 6-year matrix. The only thing I usually point out to people here is you notice that as we do these, we typically plan the upcoming year. If that's 2023 right off the front, we'll have a pretty stacked schedule. As you get farther and farther out, those projects are a little less baked, right? And so some of those come and go or take longer, so you see a lot more space in the schedule. As we get closer, it gets more condensed and we have more current project activity. So let's keep going. Only other thing I wanted to quickly touch on as far as the funding component of this, people have talked a little bit about grants already today. So I put up a little bit of a graphic here that we also shared with council in November, 2023 to 2028. So we've got 2 of those projects on there that currently have about $1 million awarded to them. We are waiting for word whether we were successful in getting another $150,000 for some design work for another project that's on that list. And then there are about 7 projects that are currently on the list that are out a little farther that I'm hoping to put in some grant proposals for $4 to $5 million that we would hope to get if we got everything that we submitted, which, you know, maybe we'll get lucky, right? But we actually usually do pretty well as far as that goes, as far as the percentage of what we ask for that we're successful. So.
And the grant proposals all go to the State Department of Ecology?
That's correct, most of the time, yeah. Our primary grant programs that we utilize are under the Water Quality Combined program at Ecology, and so there's several different things. There's Centennial Clean Water, there's Federal 319 funds, there's Stormwater Financial Assistance Program funds, state revolving funds, right, for, you know, so there's a bunch of stuff under one application process, and they kind of parse it out. But that's our primary source. There are some others out there that we've explored a little bit, but the Ecology ones have been kind of our bread and butter as far as that goes. Let's see. Looking back through the program, I just found it kind of interesting. 2011 to 2022, so the past decade or so, for structural stormwater controls projects, about $16.5 million of clean water funds, so about 73% of our funding for our capital projects has come from the Clean Water Fee Fund. But $4.6 million in state grants, and then another 1.5 in state provisos. That's essentially grant money that was directed from the legislature directly to Clark County to build projects, right? And then they administer them as grants through Ecology, but they were not competitive. That was just the legislature saying, hey, we like these projects, go build them, right? So you put that all together, you know, over a quarter of our capitals come from grants and provisos, so that's kind of nice. We hope to at least hit that going forward and maybe even exceed it if we get lucky. That might be my last slide on this. Yep, okay. Sorry, that was whirlwind. Questions about capital programming? I'm always happy to come back and talk about that at any point.
I have a question, Jeff.
Beth.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, for the talk. You know, I have a pretty good idea of some of the larger projects, some of the larger like retrofit projects and projects that fall under the capital program. What's the smaller range of projects that you work on? What are some of the you know, sort of what's the smaller range of retrofits or things that you take on?
Sure. Yeah, our projects range from, you know, small repair projects that could have a little bit of a retrofit element if we're gonna go in and repair something, like a facility that needs some work that's, you know, not doing very well. If it's a location that we can get a little bit more out of, right? We may expand it or add some treatment, that kind of stuff. And those type of things might be in the, you know, $40,000 to $100,000 range sometimes. They could be that small, just adding a couple of catch basins that have treatment cartridges in them where there wasn't any before, right? That kind of stuff. You can't see me. I actually am looking at you over there up on the thing. So, yeah. So we'll do those kind of things. And then, you know, moving up from there, we're doing a lot of sort of what I kind of call linear road projects. Rod had mentioned about these high traffic areas that really we can get a lot of bang for the buck, like Highway 99, Hazeldale Avenue. We've got a bunch of projects in those areas where, for, you know, they're kind of in that $200,000 to $600,000 range probably, where we might go in and replace, you know, 20 of those catch basins with a variety of treatments, either vaults with a whole bunch of cartridges in it, or catch basins with that kind of stuff. And then some of our reforestation projects are also fairly, you know, kind of smallish, modest type of things, a couple acres, you know, $100,000, $80,000. So we try to spread it out, you know, because they can't all be big flagship projects, right? I'm not sure if I'm getting at what you really wanted to know there, but.
Yeah, totally. That answers my question. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep. All right, otherwise you're stuck with me going into monitoring next. Go. Cool. All right, I think this is probably about the same length as the other one. I'll try to go faster though. So, monitoring stuff. So we've got our 4 natural resource specialists in-house doing most of this work that you'll see here. Go ahead, that's pretty good. Yeah, thank you. So I just listed out a few of our major projects and programs that we're working on. So Lower Columbia Urban Streams, that's a regional monitoring program sponsored by Department of Ecology. It's a permit requirement. We actually pay into a fund to meet that permit requirement along with all the phase 2 permittees down in Southwest Washington. We all pay based on population, a prorated amount into this fund for this project. The kind of cool thing is Ecology turned right back around, and since we have the expertise and the technical folks to do this kind of work, they contract back with us to do that project. So we perform the project under contract with Ecology. They pay us $475,000 during the permit term to do that work. So we recover both the money we paid in to meet our permit requirement, plus basically the other permittees are paying us to take care of that work, which is kind of neat. What
does the monitoring entail?
Yep. So habitat monitoring, like very intensive habitat measurements, you know, pebble counts and width of flow and riparian zones and pools and riffle ratios, all that kind of good stuff, right? Yep. Okay. Very comprehensive habitat measurements. Invertebrates, so the bugs in the stream that we do, like you've done a lot of, that's part of this. Stage monitoring, conductivity monitoring, and sediment samples. And these are at very well developed sites. So these streams, specifically, Ecology wants to study these streams that are within the urbanized areas, right? And so they're very specifically chosen for that goal. There are 17 sites, I think, that we are doing based on a 5-year, kind of like our long-term monitoring, right? There's 5 sites that are constant through the permit term, and there are 5 plus 12, I think we have 17 total, and the rest of them are on a 1-year cycle, right? So you do a couple sites a year. Put that all together, wrap it all together, write a report to Ecology, and away we go. But it's complementary in ways to what we do countywide already. Yes, sir.
You have a monitoring staff. The city of Vancouver also has a monitoring staff. How many of the other Permit 2 groups have monitoring staff?
Not much, and the city doesn't really have very much monitoring. Most of the monitoring they do is through consultants.
Through consultants?
Yeah, yeah, they have a few folks that are scientist folks, but a lot of their primary monitoring on like Burnt Bridge Creek and that, they're contracted with, various firms to do that work.
All right.
Yep. Wadeable Streams is that second one, so that's our countywide monitoring program that we've done for many, many years. It is the basis of the stream health report that we put out every 5 to 10 years. We just put one of those out last year too. Was that last year? Have we got that? That was a big year. 2022 is a big year. So we published that. That is on one of those, hopefully you've seen that by now. I think we've gone through that a little bit. Some of you maybe have seen it. The veterans have seen it. So the new folks, I recommend taking a look at it. It is on the website that Eric has probably shared, and we'll share some more. I can't remember what the stupid thing's called. Your watershed, no, not Watershed Alliance, but the big.
There's a link to it in one of the prior.
Yeah, it's in there. So, really super interesting stuff, I think, but I
have kind of a question that, I've been monitoring Burnt Bridge Creek just out of personal interest because I live close to it.
Okay.
And the 2013 $3 million fine that I guess we helped pay for. But there's a lot of work done in 2020, 9 different monitor points along the creek.
Yep.
Everything's dirty. Ecology's involved. City of Vancouver's involved.
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody from the county on that list. This task force that's working on it. There's a report supposed to be out the end of last year. We're still waiting on it. So that's a pretty significant creek.
It is.
In terms of water for the county, and is that just like handed over to the city of Vancouver? Why is the county not involved? Copy anything? I don't get it.
We keep a pulse on it. So it's Ecology that's running that. It's a TMDL development for that, right? That's run by Ecology, and the vast majority of Burnt Bridge Creek lies within the city boundary.
Right.
And that is why the county is not as involved there. There's just a little bit of very upper Cold Creek, right? So that's where we have that nexus. So they tend to, focus mostly on the main stem when they're talking about that stuff. So we are peripherally involved, but the reason is it's just mostly within the city. All the other TMDL work that the Department of Ecology does in the county, we are heavily involved in as a stakeholder and as a partner.
At least you're monitoring, because I'm hoping when that comes out and they decide a plan to clean up whatever, that there's learning there that can be applied to other,
absolutely, and
other water in the county.
You hit it exactly, and so I'll hit that here in just a sec.
Jeff, what's happening with, is there TDML monitoring going on in Salmon Creek, Lake River watershed as well?
Not Lake River per se. Salmon Creek is already under an active TMDL for sediment, bacteria, temperature. Yeah. So there is already an active TMDL there. Clark County is a partner and a stakeholder in that TMDL, and so some of the work that we do and some of the coordination we do with other agencies and groups in that area is based on supporting the goals of that TMDL. So yeah, we do kind of, and our data there, supports long-term kind of looking at, are we improving anything, right? Does that make sense? Wadeable Streams, that's our 51 sites all through the county. We do 9 of them all the time. We do the rest of them on a 5-year rotating basis. So once every 5 years, all the other 42 get hit for a year. Water quality, temperature, and stream bugs, invertebrates, those are our main things for those. Hydrology, we have 9 stations that we run for stream flow countywide, 6 rainfall gauges. These are all continuous monitors, right? We do some microbial source tracking, which is bacterial DNA. So we are looking at, we take water samples, send them in, they look at DNA markers to see whether we're looking at cattle bacteria, or are we looking at human bacteria, or are we looking at beetles or dogs, right? So we can get a handle on kind of the sources of some of the bacteria in some of our streams. And so we're working a fair amount with public health right now to kind of leverage some of these data so that they can help, especially where we're finding human sources, right? Where they can go in and they can match those data up with their database of septic systems and where septic systems are in and out of compliance for inspection, right? And so they can sort of look at these areas that we're finding that might be a little higher on the radar and say, ooh, we got something going on here. They can go there and be doing kind of a concerted effort to get compliance, which I think is pretty cool.
Do they use that system to track cattle and cattle pollution in the creeks as well?
Well, yes, yeah. Well, not track it necessarily, but when we go to a location, right, if we're testing with, for bovine fecal, yeah, we can tell if it's there or not. You don't necessarily get a pinpoint of where that source is, but if you look at land use upstream and you look at where you're at, you can get an idea. And so then people like the Conservation District who are working with, I mean, that's their business, right? They work with landowners and small farmers, and they can go in and contact those folks and say, hey, what about it? Let's do some good here. Right, so Rod mentioned the illicit discharge detection and elimination. My group does that. So we got to screen 12% of the storm system every year, 60% total for the permit term. Next, please. All right, the rest are just maps, I think, so we're kind of done, but and it's really hard to see, sorry, you guys. This is those flow stage and rain gauge sites, so they look like they're kind of all right on top of each other based on the scale, but they're at different subwatersheds, right? They're all in different streams. So we've got, places way out here for rainfall gauges spread kind of all around, and then a bunch of active flow gauges. Let's keep going. This is a quick map of those wadeable streams, those 51 locations. Hard to see at a distance the coloration, but there are 9 orange dots, which are the ones that we go to all the time, every year, continuously. And the other yellow ones are the ones that are on that rotating panel. The only places that we don't really test as far as that program goes are the main stem East Fork. Some of those streams just are a little too big for what we do, and they're not really, in the context of stormwater management, they're a little too big. So we are more on kind of the tributary stream scale, okay? Let's go next. All right, this gets at what Jeff was saying, I think. The data uses for all this stuff kind of combined. Obviously, there's permit reports, like Rod was talking about, for the lower Columbia urban streams and the illicit discharge stuff. We've got the stream health report that hopefully folks will get a chance to look at. That one we really like. That state TMDL water cleanup plan and kind of pollution identification and correction work. We share a lot of data with ecology. We share a lot of data with partners for grants. Basin and capital planning can benefit from this, especially from the hydrology. Education outreach, we've done some stuff where we find, there's a whole bunch of dog DNA in this area. Why don't we focus a little bit of our outreach there as far as the pet waste programs, right? Modeling, so calibration, verification of hydrologic and hydraulic models. That's all coming from that precipitation data and the rain gauge or the stream gauges. We look at long-term trends as part of our reporting for habitat, bug scores, water quality parameters, all of which gives us a better sense of kind of the direction that we're heading sometimes with whatever the community as a whole is doing to try to make things better or affect change. Is it actually having an effect down on the ground? It takes a long time and a lot of data to really get a handle on that. But we've got, some of these projects that we've been doing have been going since, the early 2000s now. So we've got a pretty darn good data set there to be looking at and going, wow, there is a difference, or holy smokes, nothing's working, right? So it's good stuff to know. A lot of public records that we create by collecting this stuff, a lot of data requests, agencies, consultants, volunteer groups, partner groups. Lackawanna Watershed Council is my example up there. Been working with Roger on some data to help with some of their planning that they're going to want to do as far as their upcoming monitoring. So a lot of stuff you can do with the data. I think we do a pretty good job of leveraging, the work we do and helping other people do good work as well. So I think that might be my last. Yes. That's all I got on the monitoring. I didn't bring anything for the maintenance programs. That's kind of a whole nother ball of worms that we can talk about another time, probably, just to not take time tonight, but happy to come back in and talk about that effort as well, because there's tons going on there. Whew. Other questions? Sorry for the rapid fire. Thanks. Okay.
That was pretty fast. It was very fast.
Speedy.
Do you want to do yours first, and then I can kind of wrap it up?
That's up to you. I mean, you're running a
That's fine,
program.
because I can get into some of the mission statement and the strategic plan and the county policies and the bylaws at the next meeting when everybody's here, if you want. That way we can spend more time talking about the programs and just do all the presentation stuff.
I think that sounds good.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Sandra and Kate?
Sounds good to me.
Yep, sounds great.
Okay. All right. Okay, Roger.
Actually, it's both Roger and Bob,
And
because this is going to be a tag team match.
Okay.
And we have to practice together, so we're going to be, but we've done this before. Okay, let me start. We're going to talk a little bit of mission goals, watersheds in our county. We're going to talk a little bit about the goals of the Clean Water Commission from our standpoint, and take a look at some pictures of some of the things that these guys have been actually talking about tonight, and to make sure we have these things in our mind when somebody brings up a swale or whatever, so we know what we're talking about. I'm going to hit on the Lacamas watershed and go kind of in detail of what's being done in there by a bunch of science people over the last couple of years, because I'm going to use it as a model of what is happening out there in our ecosystems and in our watershed. It's not happening in every one, but it's happening far more than we knew when we started. And then we'll wrap it up with some things. Us. All right. Yeah. Oh, I can't. I'm trying to do this way and it doesn't work. All right. Hit the next one, because you can't read. Let me read this to you, because it's interesting. The Clean Water Commission will, in all their actions and recommendations, strive to achieve healthy watersheds throughout Clark County, and to ensure the integrity of the water cycle as defined by commonly accepted best standards. The Clean Water Commission will do so by recognizing the importance of the community's needs, seeking and recommending actions that can be implemented at a rate and with methods that are achievable in accordance with accepted applicable laws. That is a mouthful, but to me, it's very, very critical to why we're here and why the Clean Water Division exists, is because I really don't know if we report to the county commissioners. I don't know if we report to the Clean Water Division, but we sit in there politically as a group of independent people that have water quality of all our bodies of water at heart, and can crack a whip when it needs to be done.
Your turn.
Oh, next one.
Well, it goes without saying, I think, that both of us, anyway, when we got together, talked about this was Roger's idea to begin with, that the commission needed to take a more active role in trying to structure things so that we actually are looking to improve water quality within the county and try to reach a more productive way of addressing our principal goals. And I think we were both first-year people last year, and we ended the year with the feeling that we hadn't really gotten to the point where we were really well-focused on how we could help, what we could do to help, and those are the kind of things and reasons that brought us about to this point where we wanted to do this. And so we're looking to take a more proactive role in how the Clean Water Commission itself can function within this system. And I think it's real clear from the discussions we've already gone through this evening that there's a great deal that's being done. Plates are pretty full, and the question is, what can we do to make this a better system? And that's where we're at. So we want to reduce pollution, obviously, in our stormwater runoff. We want to improve water quality treatment. We want to reduce stream erosion and protect river habitats. We want to keep our waterways safe for recreation and other uses. And then we've heard of several examples of the ways in which rain gardens and wetland restoration programs and all of the infrastructure that goes into this is currently being tried to focus on this thing. The question is, what does the commission do to move this forward? Next one here is what we're looking for. And this, just to put this in perspective, and obviously Clark County, Southwest Washington, the state of Washington for that matter, we're not unique here. There's a whole bunch of things going on, and they're going on throughout the state. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned is there's a stormwater center located primarily in Puget Sound, which is supposed to address the needs of the entire state. It's an information dissemination organization. It was created by the legislature. They actually have a woman now who is, I believe, assigned to Southwest Washington, someone else that's an asset that we can work with as well. This is another outlet, another of the multitude of partners beyond those partnerships that are part of the urban or part of the political sphere. And some folks that are worth knowing. The other thing is indicated, what this really comes down to for commissioners is how do we help? It's political support, it's financial support, it's reviewing processes to see if the way we're spending money is the most effective ways to spend money and to get the greatest bang for the buck. Part of that, obviously, the primary grant agency has already been discussed. Most of this money that comes in that's not directly from the county budget or from the fees that are associated with it are coming from grants from the State Department of Ecology. And it clearly seems to us anyway that we need to integrate better with the State Department of Ecology, maybe have someone from the State Department of Ecology grants come down, talk to us about what we can do to help capture additional resources to address some of the issues we have. The question is, how is Southwest Washington going to fit into the bigger picture? I think we can help that happen. When it comes down to here, we've already discussed the monitoring program. The real reason this is here is we're really looking at, I believe it's 17 watersheds within the county. And those watersheds have been monitored for some time now. Each one has a set of unique problems and issues. What has led some of the people to become commissioners is a particular interest with one particular watershed. What's led some of the commissioners to become involved is a much broader interest in just maintaining the better environmental health of the county areas as a whole where they live. Regardless of what brings us all here, it's important that we remain dedicated, in our minds anyway, to trying to make things better. And these 17 watersheds, every one of them is important. And I think there's a number of issues that come up. You've mentioned Burnt Bridge Creek, Jeff, and it primarily falls within the purview, apparently, of the city of Vancouver, not looked at very stringently by the county. We had a fellow make a presentation on Burnt Bridge Creek that talked about the homeless encampments along the streams, the problems that they're causing. And I felt really bad because we basically sent them away and said, not our problem. One of the things I think the commission is kind of liable to do here is take a look at this silo management type thing that we're looking at, where the city is responsible for this, the county's responsible for that. How do these things integrate? It seems to me that's one of the issues that the county is, or the commission is, well suited to address, is how these various political entities are integrated. It's an age-old problem. I actually served on the International Technical Committee for the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. And it was a problem there. It's a problem in a microcosm of that problem here. We've got this situation where natural resource boundaries don't conform to political boundaries. And it's universal in environmental problems throughout the country. And the question is, how is it appropriately integrated? And how do you get folks to work together across these boundaries to reach their goals? Let's go to the next one. And here we've just, yeah, you want to go through these or you want me to?
I don't care. Maybe we talked about capital planning and capital payment, and these are the kinds of projects, and these are going to be a bunch of visuals. This is the kind of thing that you get into. You've got to replace a pipe, you got to replace a valve, and yeah, people have to go around it and they look at it. What are those guys doing down there? But they have a lot of fun, you know. But this has to happen all the time, and that's part of what goes on with the whole water quality bunch. We've all seen these things. They are, let me tell you something, and I have a story here. Washougal said, we are going to do this. And they took all of their areas in the city that they had control over, and instead of having to go in and maintain them, they made rain gardens out of them. And the plants grow, and this guy goes around once a year, and he kind of cleans it up. And I talked to him. He says, Roger, this is better than sliced bread because it handles water pollution. We get all this stuff stuck in here, and it didn't cost us hardly a dime once we got it all done. I wanted to do it in my neighborhood and all the people. Anyway, but there are all sorts of different designs, and they're kind of cool, and people like things like this. Let's do the next moving on. Oh, bioswales. The poor Lacamas watershed has a bioswale that's in trouble. It's in court, actually. And it's on the river, or on the lake. And these bioswales, if they're maintained, they're great. If they're not maintained, they become an issue. The one on Lacamas, the Department of Ecology came, looked at it, said, this is now a wetland. You can't do anything to it. They want to take it back to what it was supposed to be 27 years ago now, which was, looks like that thing on the right, just grass on the bottom, where they went in and mowed it. Well, they didn't mow it for 23 years, and they want to go back in and put it back to this. It's still in court. I don't know what's going to happen. But bioswales. Other kinds of bioswales. Pictures. I like pictures. They help me understand what people are talking about, to have a visual. I don't know if we have any of these things here. They're simply roadside places that pick up the water off the sidewalk, sometimes off the street, and allow it to percolate down. And I don't know if we have any around here. Do we?
We do, those are essentially more of those bioretention.
Yeah, on a smaller scale.
They're, smaller scale and kind of curbside, curb cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have quite a few of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
I see them more with new development going in.
And people are thinking more along this line. They really are, I think. Next.
What's that in the upper right corner there? What's that illustrating?
That one?
Yeah.
That's just another kind of this, oh, wrong slide. All right. The one on the upper right corner is erosion control. It was actually in one of Jeff's pictures, but that's erosion control. You've gone along highways and you've seen these maps that they have and the rolls of these things, and that's what that one above is. And I really don't know what the gravel is all about, but essentially it's restricting erosion, it's holding the water, it's holding the sediment, it's slowing down the movement of water, and that's what those maps are about. And you see them in new construction. The one on the left is just another way to keep a waterway from eroding and taking sediment downstream. It's a rocket, and that makes it traps sediment and it slows down the water. New construction. Problems, flooding. We all see it. And these guys work to keep this flooding at a minimum. It's their job. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Next. There's some of that permeable paving we were talking about earlier. I wish they'd get the technology far more advanced than what it is now. It's somebody's great idea. This is something that I know Clark Public Utilities does a lot of. I've done it with them. And I know you guys, the Clean Water Bunch, does some of this. I don't know if you contract it or not. Or do you actually get somebody to go out and plant the tree? How do you do it?
Usually internally.
Usually internally?
Yeah, our vegetation management, our noxious weed management folks will often do these plantings for us. They also get some external crews from the Conservation Corps,
Yeah.
type of folks that will come in and help
Yeah.
with the plantings. So, yeah. So a combination.
Okay. Here's another one. The riparian revegetation. I was out in the Loch Ness watershed yesterday, and I had heard that 40% of it was unvegetated. There's nothing along the creek. And my buddy and I went out and were looking, and there's more vegetation out there now, and things have grown up. And from when they did that 40% figure, it's changed. It's not all willows and other kinds of riparian vegetation that you'd want, but it at least is a little bit of shade. And we need to get, and the reason why you want that is to reduce the temperature of the water and to slow it down again. What's her name?
Marley.
Marley. This is the, I mean, I've been there and done that. And you're collecting the macroinvertebrates that are in the water, and you see which ones you get, because if you get a certain set, it's a bunch of slugs. Yeah, you've got nasty water. Scud, you know. You get some other kinds of critters. The water's pretty healthy, and that's why I'm waiting to see the results that you've done. You do that every 10 years in a watershed.
Every 5.
Every 5.
Maybe before we move on to this, just a few other comments about that. All of these various structures, and as the county develops more and more rapidly, and apparently that's how this is going, the O&M budget is very clearly going to begin to overwhelm things. We probably don't have the income source to maintain even what we have, and you can begin to understand or appreciate the problems that the division has just in maintaining and operation and maintenance of what they've got. And as we continue to develop this stuff, the real questions, I think, for the commission are, how do we communicate to the county commissioners and others about what the overwhelming problem this is going to be in the future? And if they're really serious about maintaining water quality habitat in this county, they're going to have to make some provisions. And it's kind of interesting. This led me to read a little bit of the European literature on some of the things and how they treat these same issues. And one of the things that surprised me a lot is some areas are now going to treatment for stormwater management, that they actually run their stormwater through treatment facilities. And that may be one of the ways in which you begin to have to deal with this problem in a continually urbanizing environment. I think if you look at the monitoring program data that we do have on the website, and I encourage everybody to spend a little bit of time and look at that, the stream quality definitely is, without having done the analysis, I'll say stream quality is directly related to the amount of development. That those areas of the county with the least development have the best quality streams. Those areas with the highest amount of development have the poorest quality streams. And the reality is all of this stuff that's been in place, some of it back to the 90s for the last several decades, doesn't really completely offset the impacts of what development does. And I think that's important to bear in mind as we go through this too. And it's important to bear in mind then that accurate monitoring is critical to making in some of these cases in the future if you're going to make the plug for more help.
Okay. This is I don't know about all of you, but I mean, community education works. And I'll give you a very short example of it. When 3 years ago, when we took a look at working and monitoring Lacamas Lake, people would walk their dogs down in it, and they'd go down and jump in the water, and you're right in the middle of blooms, cyanobacteria blooms. And I mean, here. And I mean, this is at 400 fire, but it puts out a toxin that will kill you and kill dogs. I mean, but this whole business of community education works, because now, you go by and these people are walking their dogs along the river and the lake, and they're keeping their dogs out of the water. And dogs don't want to stay out of the water because they get it on their paws and they lick it, and they're in the vets. And one of the buddies, I was out in the lake, his daughter works for a vet, and she tells stories all the time about sick dogs, and we had sick people as well. Anyway. I want to talk about the Lacamas watershed because I know something about it. I don't know anything about the rest of these watersheds much, but I know something about the Lacamas watershed, and I want to talk to you about it because it is something that as you start looking at a particular watershed, you get really wrapped up in it, and you see what's going on. You start seeing cycles. We have been monitoring Lacamas Lake. We're going into our third season, our third year of actually monitoring. We monitor it through the Phytoplankton Monitoring Network, it's part of NOAA. It's a national process. All our data is national, and we're taking a look at. We started with 3 sites on the lake, and we have we're now on 5 different sites. We piloted last year a mid-lake set of samples. And if we get our grant, we'll actually do profiles of the lake, and we're going to pilot the profiles this year as soon as we get our material. But we're going to do a mid-lake testing once a month. We do the monitoring every week, and we do it with a bunch of old retired science guys and gals. One pilot. He's a pilot for Alaska. He loves it. He's an aeronautical engineer, and these guys are all microbiologists. I'm a botanist. We got a retired forester. We've got a bunch of science-oriented people that are doing this, and I keep PR people off their back. Here's a bloom. That's on Round Lake. Another bloom on Fallen Leaf, and that's the first bloom I saw down on the right, and it was up at Lacamas Shores, and the whole west side of that lake in August is one great big bloom, like the stuff on the left.
Next. I'm lost myself wherever I am here. No.
One of the things that happens when you start this is you start making connections. We now talk congenially with the city of Camas. In the beginning, we didn't work so congenial, but now we're pretty congenial. We talked to Geosyntax, who is their consultant. We're talking to the city of Vancouver a little bit. And those kinds of connections, we start the connection that we have here, those kind of connections are extraordinarily valuable, and we train all the time. And we've had I don't know how many trainings we had, a lot of them, because it's really important. And we're going into this, we're piloting this year a look at probably 5 different sites, maybe 6 or 7, out in the watershed to take a look at simple water quality and to take a look at the macroinvertebrates that are there. And we will share this data and share it on a broad way, and we are really looking at long-term process. We're not looking at a one-time shot. This is a long-term process. And somebody said, how long are you going to be? And I said, how long does it take a tree to grow? You know, it's a long time. And we'll be at it for a while. I'll probably be dead. one of the things on the watershed is China Ditch. And this bunch went through a whole process last year of talking to them about changing the name, and they put up I guess they're gonna put up a sign to reflect it now. And that's, to me, that's better, because it's history, and history shouldn't be ignored. And, yeah, I was there yesterday, and there's a lot more vegetation than there was then, but it's still kind of a straight ditch. I think, I don't know, I've had enough. Any questions? You wanna do more? We do more.
No, I think the real purpose that we wanted to speak here is that the commission, in our opinion anyway, hasn't had enough discussion about what direction, what actual things the commission should be doing, specific actions that we can take to make this better. And I think and we've suffered, and in part I blame COVID for this, quite frankly, because it's very difficult to have these kind of discussions if we're not in person. To do this stuff on WebEx or Zoom just doesn't seem to have engendered much. And my sympathy goes out to the poor kids that have had to go through 2 years of school like this, because if they feel like I did, having done this, I can understand the frustration a lot of people feel. But I think the commission as a whole has, we're all volunteers, we're all putting in time, and we're here because we want to make a difference. And I think that's what the commission needs, is some focus, be it Lacamas Lake, be it Vancouver Lake, be it however we choose to go. The Lewis River gets a lot of attention. But I think what we need to do is get focused on what we specifically can be doing to further the cause of cleaner water in the county. And that's really what we're about, and we're making our plea to the rest of the commission to try to get there.
Well, as a newbie member of this body, I have to say it's really refreshing to hear that, because when I first started looking at the materials, I thought we were essentially a stormwater body, and that was about it. And now I understand that we got a bigger vision out there that we can maybe grasp onto here. And I find that to be very, very optimistic for this body.
I find that people care about water all over this county, actually all over Washington. Not only care about it, but they're willing to do something about it. I mean, I started working on Lake Spokane in the 80s, and I mean, people care about the water, and they find ways to get involved in what's happening. And we can go as far as a commission in any number of directions, keeping that focus of, hey, we are about water, and we are about the water that's all around us that we live with, and we have an obligation to do something about it. And the more ideas that hit the table that get some kind of traction, let's go for it. I mean, I've fought with water all my life, and I love it. My next job is digging the plants out of Lacamas Lake and finding out what grows there. They want me to do a plant survey. I don't like aquatic plants, but I'll do it. What do we got? What's next?
One of the things that the training, and this is, again, as someone who was new last year, it wasn't clear to me all of the things the hoops you're supposed to jump through too, and I don't know whether you want to go through that for at least a little bit tonight, and if everybody learned that they've got to have an email address with you, and they've got to take the training and all that stuff.
Are you going to do it next week?
I'm going to remind you all about the OPMA requirements next week, as well as go through all of just remind you, don't, please use your Clean Water Commission email for everything, and CC me on everything. Otherwise, you may be subject to a public records request. If I'm CC'd in on it, then the county can access it easily. And multiple emails going back and forth could, if there's enough people, constitute a meeting, a public meeting that is not being held in the proper form. So we want to keep you guys safe, and we want to keep you out of trouble and keep us out of trouble. And I'll go more into that in addition, because I know there's a number of people that actually need to get their OPMA certification redone, and I will I sent out some already, and I will send out additional information, and I'll go over it again. And I think that, I'll send out again the strategic plan that was approved by the commission. It goes over the commission's approved goals and the where they want to go, and the mission and the vision and the values, as well as some of the long-term goals, and I will do a summary, and I'll email it out to everybody, that highlights the 3 primary work groups that go over the research, partnerships, and education, and give a little bit of backup information on that, because the chairs of those will probably need to give a little presentation, and so people can be making a decision, and moving forward on that, because we'll need to get going on action plans. I think that is it for now, and I've sent out, I sent you guys the bylaws a couple weeks ago. So I think I've sent out a lot of the paperwork ahead of time that they have, but I was going to go over it again, but since we don't have everybody here, let's do it one last time next week. Anybody have any questions for me? And I'll just do a brief overview of the strategic plan and everything else. We do have a number of big issues to talk about next week, as well as the election for chair and vice chair. So, because that didn't happen in November, so we need to get that done. And as well as voting on the bylaw change for changing the meetings, if that is something you want to continue to do, to have them on even months instead of off. So, and I think that's about it, unless anybody has any questions. I appreciate everybody.
Is the OPMA training done online?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And I think I sent you a link, and I think one of the pages I gave you has a link, and I will resend it out again, that it goes to the state's website. Familiarize with it. There's a lot to review and to see, and can go down a number of different rabbit holes. And then there is and I want to double check the link on it. There is a place where you can go in and you fill in the certificate that says, yes, I did it, and the date, and you type it all in, and then print it out and send it to me, or email it to me. So that is it, unless anybody has any questions. Kate, Sandra, do you have anything?
No questions here. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No questions here.
Great. I'll see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.